A federal indictment of 10 men is alleging that payments were made to high school and college players to influence where players sign.
Coaches at some of the nation's top programs soliciting and accepting cash bribes.
What we now believe is the Louisville basketball program.
The allegations in a criminal investigation are troubling to all of us.
In the complaint, there are 2 players that were given money that amounts to as much as $150,000.
We're talking about a major NCAA violation.
Effective immediately, Coach Pitino has been placed on an unpaid administrative leave. Tom Jurich has been placed on a paid administrative leave.
It's an unpaid leave. They're following the handbook. He's done, right?
Oh, he's done.
I am absolutely delighted to announce I am appointing David Padgett as the acting head men's basketball coach.
It's been a dark week at U of L. There's no other thing to say about that. We're getting through it. We're putting our head down, going back to work.
There's lots of emotions here. I think everybody's clear on that, whether it be related to Rick or to Tom. And, for now, we have to quarantine those emotions and focus on the task at hand.
It's official. Rick Pitino is done at Louisville. The school is being investigated as part of a federal corruption probe.
Rick Pitino is a Hall of Fame coach. He won NCAA titles at 2 different schools, both in the basketball-crazed state of Kentucky. Along the way, he moved around plenty, but it was always on his terms. He left for greener pastures or bigger challenges, or both. The end was not supposed to look like this. It wasn't supposed to be someone else's decision, but he was fired, Louisville says, with cause. Pitino sat down with Jay Bilas today for his first public comments since his firing.
The federal government is alleging that a Louisville assistant requested a payment from an Adidas representative to provide to a Louisville recruit. It was alleged to be $100,000. Did you know anything about that?
No. One of the toughest things you have to do, and I hope you never do it, is take a lie detector test. You have a blood pressure machine, you're wired up, and I was asked 2 questions. I said, and I want you to ask me if any other recruits in my tenure were ever given anything. And he said, that's not what we're here for. We're here for, did you have any knowledge of the Bowen family getting any money? Did you have any knowledge of an Adidas transaction? And I answered absolutely not on both questions and passed the lie detector test. So I had no knowledge of any of this.
I have heard reasonable people ask the question, how could he not have known? How do you respond to that?
Jay, all I can tell you is I don't answer to those people. I answer to my players who have been over the top in support of me. I answer to my assistant coaches and, most important, my family. But the one person you got to answer to in life is God. And I sit here today and tell you, should I have known that somebody walked into a hotel room? And that, I don't see how I could possibly know. In the other case, people say, how did you not know? Well, there were security in the building, assistant coaches, 20 managers. We monitor social media. Not one thing came out in social media in that other case. So should I know? Let's just say I take ownership for who I hired and take full responsibility for that.
When you're head coach at Louisville, it made me think of this reputation you have always had for being on top of every single detail. Do you think that reputation hurts you now in the court of public opinion with the way people look at this?
Jay, again, I'm going to answer to God, and I know the truth. And does it hurt me? Of course it hurts me. You know, I want everybody to be proud of me. It hurts, but that being said, if I knew something was wrong, I immediately would have terminated anybody in that situation. I have very little, I don't have any tolerance for people that do the wrong thing in that area. I do go over every little point. But no, I didn't know someone walked in a hotel room and was part of a sting operation. No, I didn't know that.
What kind of access did Jim Gatto or anyone from Adidas have to the basketball program by virtue of the contract?
Very little. They had very little, and I don't think they wanted access. A week before this broke, they were doing a whole thing, testing area. They took a whole gymnasium and they were testing the shoes and using our players and showing it how it works. That was the first real interaction we've ever had with Adidas in terms of getting involved with their brand.
Did you know that any of your assistants were having communications with Jim Gatto?
No, not to my knowledge. If they were, it was about, I knew Kenny Johnston. If I tell him, look, I got some communication about we want to get our players into Adidas Nation. When I say players, University of Louisville basketball players, to work Adidas Nation because they get a chance to play in front of all the pro scouts. So we had 3 or 4 that were going to do it. Dang Nadell couldn't do it. He was hurt. So we had Ray Spalding and B.J. King go and Donovan Mitchell the year before. So most of our communication and assistant coaches was about that, or about AAU programs that are represented by Adidas, players, that type of stuff, but nothing to do with payments or anything of that nature.
So as head coach at Louisville, your interaction with anyone from Adidas would be how often?
Well, based on my text messages that I turned over to the FBI voluntarily, based on that, it was very minimal, maybe 2 or 3 times a year.
On Tuesday, you filed suit against Adidas, the United States District Court for the Western District of Kentucky. Why did you decide to file suit against Adidas now?
Well, they terminated me without a phone call, and that's not the reason. It's not revenge for that. I felt they're largely responsible for what has gone on, and they took my love and my passion away from me. Not all of them. There were other reasons, one being one of my coaches. Took my love of my life away, besides my personal family. So, they are responsible for their actions. As I take ownership for 2 hires, they must take ownership for what they did.
You've said publicly on multiple occasions now that you will be vindicated in this. What does vindication mean to you?
I've already been vindicated. Not by a lie detector test, just by the text messages my players have sent me, the phone calls from my assistant coaches, other people. I've been vindicated in my eyes. Nobody's been arrested on my staff. I've been vindicated because I have to answer to one person. We all do. Whatever God you believe in. That's the most important thing.
Do you feel comfortable that you will be clear of any charge coming your way in the future?
1,000%. Because I know the truth. And like I tell my players, I'm not going to, the one thing you don't want to do is ever mislead the FBI or the U.S. Attorney. You don't want to do that. You got bigger problems if you do that. You better tell the truth.
How do you feel about the way the University of Louisville has treated you since this news came out?
When you say the University of Louisville, the people there are the love of my life, the other coaches. I worship the ground that my players walk on. That's how much I love them. But to me, this Board of Trustees locking me out of my office, telling me I'm dismissed before facts came out, let it develop. They're not the University of Louisville. They're a board hired by the governor to deal with the president's situation a while ago. They're not the University of Louisville that I know. So I harbor no bitterness. I'll get better rather than bitter. But I don't believe it's the University of Louisville. So the University of Louisville didn't treat me that way. This Board of Trustees did. And a couple of them. I shouldn't put them all in one lump sum.
What was the most emotional time in this to date?
Speaking to the players.
Have you been able to have interaction with the players since you last spoke with them?
What I told them, I said, guys, David Padgett is one of you. He played for me. He's like a son to me, like you are. Give him everything you got. Give it to him. Win it all. But I said, I'm not going to be in contact with you. It's his team now.
Do you believe you will coach again?
I don't know. I'm not sure I want to. Don't know.
Why do you say you're not sure you want to?
Who knows what, I'm just trying to concentrate on today, and I'm really not concerned about the future.
How do you think this affects your legacy?
My legacy is really not important because I'm not that significant. I think it takes you a long time to get an ounce of humility. But when you turn 50, I don't know if you're 50 yet, but you realize that humility is the most important word in the dictionary. And my legacy is really irrelevant. It's not that important.
Joined now live by Jay Bilas here on SportsCenter. And Jay, you've known Rick a long time, and I'm sure you had some sense of what you might hear today, but based on what you did hear, I'm curious what, if anything, surprised you.
The answer to the question of will you coach again, Scotty, I thought that Rick would say that I hope so, I love coaching, I'd love to get back to it, I miss it, that kind of thing. But to hear him say, I don't know if I want to, was surprising. I mean, obviously you could tell he was very emotional, and this has been a very draining thing. I mean, he is worn out, but that did surprise me, that response.
Jay, for a lot of folks, and I would count myself among them, just to be frank here, the I had no idea defense is really hard to buy, given that that's what he used with the assistant that got him put on probation for the recruiting issues. And as you allude to, this is a guy that micromanaged every detail within his program. And so I would just ask how plausible that response is to this particular allegation about payment to a recruit.
Well, let me answer it this way. There are two things. There's actual knowledge, and then there's should have known. And let's move should have known aside for a second, because reasonable minds can differ about that.
Okay.
Do I think it's plausible that he did not have actual knowledge of this allegation, of what the government says happened in that hotel room in Las Vegas between the Adidas representative and one of his assistants? I do think it's possible he did not know. And I'll say that, you know, you're a young parent. I'm an old parent. You ask any parent of a child and say, do you know everything that's going on in your child's life? And Rick used the term humility. I think any parent would humbly say, I hope so, but I can't tell you for sure that I know everything that's going on. And I feel the same way about head coaches, that it is easy to say that the highest paid person should know everything. I think it's awfully difficult in reality for that to be the case. Now, we're talking here about the federal government. Now the NCAA says all the time, we don't have subpoena power. Well, you know who does?
Right.
Federal government.
Right.
And so we're going to find out here exactly what happened. And you know, personally, and this is just my personal belief, I'm not asking anybody to believe what I'm saying. I believe Rick Pitino when he says he didn't actually know. Now, should he have known? That's a different discussion, and I think reasonable people can say, you know what, he should have known.
It is
but actual
different.
knowledge, I believe it.
It is different, Jay, and I don't think I'm being unreasonable to point out that if you're on probation because of something you claimed you didn't know, then you need to know. In other words, you can't have your guys out there just setting up these deals. You're already on probation, right? So that's where I'm saying if he didn't know, I don't know if I'm being unreasonable to say he's got to know, because you're already on probation for something you didn't. So that's where I struggle with this, Jay, with whether he's being honest or if he's being, you know, I get stuck there. You know what I mean? And I don't know how to wiggle off that one.
I think it's a fair perspective, Scott. And look, I reached out to some of Rick Pitino's former assistants to ask him that same question. You know, am I being naive here? And to a person, they said, I was with him and for years, and I do not believe that he knew this. And we had that same discussion. Now, should he have known is a different discussion. Should a head coach have known? But when you heard Rick Pitino say, you know, the allegation was of a conversation that took place in a Las Vegas hotel room. Nobody can be everywhere at the same time and monitor every little thing. I mean, you know, we can't expect a head coach to wiretap his own staff like the government did in this particular occasion. So I'm not trying to make excuses for anyone. You know, your question was, you know, is it plausible to believe he didn't know in this instance? Right. I do think it is. I take him at his word and believe him when he said that. But I do think reasonable people can differ as to whether a person in a position of authority should have known.
Well, and I would just close this particular thought with, if he didn't know, given the situation they found themselves in, he did a horrendous job hiring assistants, because they put him in a situation where now his career could be at an end. And that's where I want to close, just with that thought, Jay. Do you believe that this career is over?
I think it will be very difficult in the short run for him to be hired in college. But again, I mean, you know, as this investigation goes forward, we have seen people that we thought their careers were over get hired again and do extraordinarily well. So I do not think Rick Pitino's career is over. I don't. And we'll obviously see what happens here. And I think your point about he made a couple of bad hires. And he acknowledged that in the interview. He acknowledged it multiple times that he is responsible for making 2 bad hires, and he certainly didn't shy away from that at all.
I know you'd never be an athletic director because you'd have to deal with the NCAA and you would never want to do it. But if you found yourself in charge of an institution that had a good basketball program and it needed a coach, would you hire him?
I would certainly consider it because I think he's a great coach.
There's no doubt about that.
But, you know, like, look, being an athletic director, I mean, I think all these athletic directors and presidents need to start taking more accountability themselves. Because while we're talking about Rick Pitino hiring assistants, you know, athletic directors and presidents hire coaches. And really, when you think about it, the only thing they have to do is hire football and basketball coaches. And the only thing they have to monitor is football and basketball coaches. But you don't hear any athletic directors and presidents saying, well, we want strict liability too. You know, whatever happens on our watch with our football and basketball coaches needs to be imputed to us. You know, they want the buck to stop with the head coach, and that's it. You know, it's funny how accountability works.
Well, it costs
accountability is great
job.
when it's somebody else, and it's not the presidents. The presidents have to start taking some accountability. They keep saying we're in charge. When are they? But I'm not sure they're leading, and I certainly don't believe they're showing much accountability.
It's been an awfully long day. I know you've been flying and being all over the place, and I appreciate you being here live with us to have this conversation, which I'm sure will continue. Jay, thank you.
My pleasure, Scotty. Thank you.
All right, we move from Jay Bilas and that story to the National League Championship Series with